The G20 Summit kicks off in Rio de Janeiro on Monday, where world leaders seek ways to tackle global challenges. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol is set to deliver a message on behalf of the country to address poverty and climate change. U.S. President Joe Biden reportedly approves Ukraine's use of long-range American missiles inside Russia. Moscow responds with a threatening message. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un renews his intent to strengthen nuclear forces with no limit and voices criticism against the U.S. amid the upcoming leadership change in Washington. It's November 18th, 8 p.m. in Seoul. This is Newscenter. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. This year's G20 Summit kicks off in Brazil. And President Yoon has touched down in Rio to attend the annual leaders meeting to address many global challenges. Our correspondent Woo Soo-young tells us what's on the agenda and what the South Korean president will highlight.
President Yoon Suk-yeol will call for global solidarity on fighting poverty and climate change, as well as countering North Korea and Russia's military cooperation in Ukraine, as he attends the G20 Summit in Rio de Janeiro. According to the presidential office, the South Korean leader will speak twice at the summit, calling for international solidarity on building a just world and a sustainable planet. On the first day of the summit on Monday, President Yoon will attend the launch of the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, a key initiative promoted by host country Brazil. During the first leader session on promoting social inclusion, Yoon will present South Korea's contributions to eradicating hunger and poverty, highlighting the country's active contribution based on its own experience and knowledge of transforming from a war-torn, impoverished country to a major economic power. He will also urge the multilateral group to support economic growth in developing countries as a fundamental solution. On the second day, Yoon will further set out ways to foster global cooperation to mitigate climate change and transition to clean energy, emphasizing Seoul's green official development assistance. During the 2023 G20 Summit, Korea pledged to contribute $300 million to supporting those most affected by climate change. Ahead of this year's summit, Yoon told a Brazilian daily that he will strongly push for supporting developing countries' access to clean energy such as hydrogen, nuclear power and renewables. This will be President Yoon's third G20 summit following his attendance in Bali in 2022 and New Delhi last year. During his time at the G20, Yoon is expected to hold bilateral meetings with the leaders of Indonesia, Mexico and South Africa and attend the MICTA leaders meeting for the third consecutive year. MICTA is a network of middle power countries comprising South Korea, Mexico, Indonesia, Turkey and Australia. Yoon's office says the president will also use the multilateral platform to call for stronger solidarity on responding to Russia and North Korea's military cooperation and aim to build consensus on resolving global challenges. In his written interview, Yoon said Russia and North Korea are shifting responsibility onto the Korea-US alliance, which has been deterring war and provocations. He pledged to closely coordinate with allies and partners to enforce robust and effective sanctions against Moscow and Pyongyang's military cooperation. Amid concerns that the incoming Trump administration could undermine such efforts by weakening America's alliances, Yoon said he is confident that he and the US president-elect would accomplish much more together, not only for bilateral relations, but for global peace and prosperity. With greater US-China tensions expected to have ripple effects across the Indo-Pacific region, Yoon said whilst Seoul will anchor its foreign policy on the South Korea-US alliance, it will also strive to maintain communication with China and develop bilateral ties in ways that contribute to peace and prosperity in the region and the global community. Woo Soo-young, Arirang News, Rio de Janeiro.
Prior to his departure from Peru, President Yoon held talks with the leaders of the U.S., Japan and China on the margins of the APEC meeting, with a key focus on North Korea's growing defiance. Our top office correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports.
APEC was an opportunity for President Yoon Suk-yeol to meet with key leaders who play crucial roles in dealing with North Korea amid the regime's deployment of military support to Russia. President Yoon met with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba on Saturday local time on the sidelines for the second bilateral summit between them in around a month.
총리님과 첫 회담 이후 러북 간 군사 협력이 북한군 파병으로 이어지는 등 영내 및 세계 정세가 급박하게 돌아가고 있습니다.
Given the increasingly severe security environment surrounding us, including recent developments with North Korea, it is a critical task to continuously strengthen cooperation between Japan and South Korea.
The two leaders also discussed plans for next year, as it will be the 60th anniversary of normalizing diplomatic relations. Yoon and Ishiba also met U.S. President Joe Biden during the summit based on an agreement to hold trilateral talks on an annual basis made during the Camp David Summit 15 months ago.
최근 북한군의 러시아 파병에서 볼 수 있듯이 엄중한 영내외 안보 환경은 한미일 삼국 협력의 중요성을 다시 한번 일깨워주고 있습니다. 바이든 대통령님 주도로 열린 지난해 캠프 데이비드 정상회의 이후 한미일 협력은 날로 견고해지고 있습니다.
The three nations also adopted a joint statement following the summit and announced the creation of the Trilateral Secretariat to institutionalize the overseeing of the trilateral cooperation following the Camp David Summit.
This is likely to be my last trilateral meeting with this important group, and I'm proud to have helped be one of the parts of building this partnership. And I think it's built to last. That's my hope and expectation.
Earlier on Friday, President Yoon also met with Chinese President Xi Jinping, which was a reunion after a year, and held a sideline summit. President Yoon, seeking China's support in pressuring North Korea, called for close cooperation between the two nations.
특히 북한의 연이은 도발과 우크라이나 전쟁, 러북 군사 협력에 대응해 한중 양국이 영내 안정과 평화를 도모하는 데 협력해 나가기를 바랍니다.
As always, President Xi stayed reserved and re-emphasized his stance that although global circumstances are changing, the two nations should commit to the original spirit of their ties, not directly addressing issues with North Korea.
Regardless of how the situation evolves, South Korea and China should remain committed to the original spirit of the diplomatic ties, uphold the path of good neighbourly friendship, and adhere to the goal of mutual benefit and shared prosperity. By leveraging their geographical proximity, cultural affinities, and deeply integrated economies, both nations can maximise their strengths and foster closer cooperation.
The two leaders also discussed economic cooperation, such as renegotiating the FTA as next year becomes the 10th anniversary since its activation, and additional fields, such as the service sector, could be included. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden has reportedly granted the green light for Ukraine to use long-range American missiles inside Russian territory. An Song-jin has the details.
U.S. officials revealed Sunday that President Joe Biden has for the first time authorized the use of U.S. long-range weapons for Ukraine to use to strike deep inside Russia. According to the New York Times, the U.S. supplied Army Tactical Missile Systems, or ATACMS, could be used against Russian and North Korean troops deployed against Ukraine forces in Russia's Kursk region. ATACMS, which have a range of 300 kilometers, are not expected to change the course of the war, but instead send a clear message to North Korea that it should no longer send its troops to Russia. While there was no public comment from the White House, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky seemed to acknowledge the reports.
Today, there's a lot of talk in the media about us receiving permission for respective actions, but strikes are not carried out with words. Such things are not announced. Missiles will speak for themselves. They certainly will. Glory to Ukraine.
Ukraine had repeatedly asked for the use of U.S. long-range weapons to target military facilities in Russia. However, the U.S. had banned Ukraine from using such weapons against mainland Russia over fears that it may escalate the conflict further. The move comes just 2 months before Donald Trump is sworn in as the next U.S. president. Trump has been critical of the provision of additional support for Ukraine, and according to the New York Times, the new administration may try to end the war under the condition that Russia keeps Ukrainian territory, which it has already taken over. The same source says Ukraine is willing to exchange Russian territory it holds in Kursk for Ukrainian regions captured by Moscow. Following the news, Russian state-owned TASS media reported that Russia's Federation Council responded by saying the use of ATACMS is bringing the world closer to a major world war. Spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry, Maria Zakharova, said President Vladimir Putin had already spoken about the issue, referring to remarks made in September when he said allowing Ukraine to use long-range weapons would mean that NATO countries are at war with Russia. Earlier on Sunday, Russia launched one of the largest missile and drone attacks on Ukraine since August, attacking energy facilities, including the power grid in Kyiv and several other cities. Around 120 missiles and 90 drones were launched, and at least 5 people were killed in the assault. Ukrenergo, Ukraine's principal energy supplier, said blackouts may occur in all regions as engineers try to repair as much of the damage from the strikes. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
North Korea's Kim Jong-un calls for a limitless advancement of the regime's nuclear forces, blaming South Korea and the U.S. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung has more.
North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un has called for the strengthening of the regime's nuclear forces without limitations and completing preparations for war. According to state-run media KCNA on Monday, such remarks came during a speech to the Korean People's Army's 4th Conference of Battalion Commanders and Political Instructors. The meeting marked the first of its kind since 2014. Saying it has become irreversible for the regime to bolster nuclear forces, Kim said the only thing left is to perfect the operational readiness to deter war and to endlessly strengthen its self-defense capabilities centered around nuclear force. For the first time since the U.S. presidential election, Kim directly criticized the U.S., saying trilateral cooperation between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo is a critical factor that threatens peace on the Korean peninsula. It was further claimed that the U.S. and the West had been staging a war against Russia with Ukraine as shock troops in order to expand the scope of Washington's military intervention into the war. Yet Kim did not mention its own troop deployment to Russia. Meanwhile, the regime again sent balloons carrying trash towards South Korea on Monday for the first time in more than 3 weeks. This came after Kim Jong-un's sister, Kim Yo-jong, claimed on Sunday that South Korea sent balloons carrying anti-regime propaganda leaflets to the north the previous day. Saying its sacred territory has been polluted, she warned that Seoul would pay a dear price. Regarding this, the South Korean military warned the regime not to test its patience, saying it has sent more than 7,000 balloons carrying trash across the border since late May.
North Korea's actions are crossing the line. We once again sternly warn that all responsibility for situations to follow lies within the North.
Apart from the trash balloon campaign, the regime has been jamming the GPS signals across the border with South Korea up until Sunday for the 10th consecutive day. According to the South military, it appears to be a military exercise to respond to the possible appearance of drones. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Last month, North Korea blew up the inter-Korean roads and train tracks built with over $100 million lent by South Korea. Now, the South is reviewing measures to reclaim the loans back. Our Choi Min-jung with the details.
South Korea is reviewing plans to reclaim loans lent to North Korea to build inter-Korean roads and train tracks. The regime blew up the roads and tracks last month in a show of discontent against the South. On Monday, South Korea's Unification Ministry revealed its policy plans for the second half of the Yoon administration and unveiled that reviews are underway. From 2002 to 2008, South Korea provided loans worth over $132 million to North Korea to construct roads and train tracks. And the decision to seek the collection of these loans comes amid rising concerns that Pyongyang may refuse to repay them altogether, as the bombing of land routes depicts the North's intentions.
Historically, there have been many instances where aid, like rice, has been provided or loans have been extended, but none of that has ever been repaid. Given the current state of inter-Korean relations and global dynamics, it's unlikely North Korea will respond.
Going forward, the ministry also seeks to increase efforts to support North Korean defectors by providing tax cuts to companies that employ North Korean defectors. It will also increase next year's funds to support private organizations in raising public awareness of North Korean human rights. The ministry also urged North Korea to return to dialogue.
The situation facing us at the halfway point of our term is not easy. North Korea still maintains a hostile and disconnected attitude. Nevertheless, our proposal for dialogue and consultation remains valid.
The government vowed to continue working closely with the incoming Trump administration to push for change and denuclearization in North Korea, steadily moving toward the ultimate goal of unification. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Over in the U.S., President-elect Donald Trump has nominated an oil and gas industry executive, Chris Wright, to serve as the next energy secretary. Wright has been a staunch defender of fossil fuel use as the CEO of Liberty Energy, an oil field services company in Colorado, denying that climate change represents a global crisis. He has no political experience, but reportedly gave large donations to Trump's campaign. Reports say Wright will support Trump's plan to increase fossil fuel production in the Department of Energy, which handles the country's energy diplomacy and controls the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. On the cultural front, Korea has set aside this week for young artists in a special project to present what they've learned. Our culture correspondent Song Yoo-jin met with them.
For young artists, the path to success is rarely paved with gold due to unstable pay and limited opportunities. However, for the performers in this play, that dream is starting to come alive. This production, titled Jojo, is the opening act of South Korea's first ever Young Artist Festival Week, where future stars in theater, classical music, ballet, and contemporary dance from the Culture Ministry's Young Artist Project perform after months of training. Earlier this year, 329 aspiring artists were chosen from an intensely competitive pool with nearly 10 applicants eyeing each spot. Over the past 8 months, they've worked alongside 9 national art companies, receiving training from experts and invaluable stage experience. These actors are part of the 40 young talents selected to train with the National Theatre Company of Korea.
We worked with 40 rookies with a wide range of experiences, learning styles, and skills. Our focus was on exploring how we could bring everyone together to speak with one voice. The process was an opportunity to delve into the core of theater as a collective art form.
After months of hard work, these actors finally took the stage to showcase their talent.
Even though some of us have already debuted, this program allowed us to step back, refine our skills, and re-enter the professional world with confidence. The National Theatre Company of Korea brought in incredible directors and instructors who taught us acting techniques, Pilates, and speech training.
What I gained most was learning from my peers. Working with 40 talented actors, I discovered so much by observing their strengths. It's an experience I'll carry with me forever.
The Young Artist Project is just getting started, with even more participants set to join next year.
We plan to include 600 participants. We hope these young talents can travel nationwide, performing in places that don't get the opportunities to enjoy cultural activities. It's about sharing their artistry with the people who need it most.
Young Artist Festival Week continues with performances by trainees of the Korean National Symphony Orchestra and the National Chorus of Korea on Monday, the Korean National Ballet on Tuesday, and the Korea National Contemporary Dance Company this weekend. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
Jin from BTS held his first fan showcase over the weekend to celebrate the release of his first solo album. Nearly 3,800 fans gathered for the two-day event, which took place at Changchun Arena in Seoul. The global superstar greeted his fans, sharing that his album Happy was created with the BTS Army in mind and that he was deeply committed to making them all happy. As the first BTS member to complete his military service, Jin released his first solo album, Happy, on November 15th. The following day, his agency Big Hit Music announced that the album's lead track, Running Wild, has topped the iTunes Top Songs chart in 70 countries. Korean pianist Im has won the Diapason d'Or de l'Année, a prestigious French classic music award. He was recognized in the Young Musician category with his album Chopin Etude in the annual ceremony held in Paris last Wednesday. Im previously won the monthly award, also given by Diapason last June with the same album. The Diapason d'Or is known to be as influential as the English Gramophone Classical Music Awards, of which Im is also a recipient. And time now to take a look at what's been happening in the world of sports. Joining us in the studio is our sports editor, Paul Need, as always. Evening, Paul.
Evening, hello there.
Let's start with football and the South Korean national team. So the team has arrived in Jordan ahead of Tuesday's match with Palestine.
Yes, that's right. The squad arrived on Sunday night, local time, or the early hours of Monday here. Up next is another World Cup qualifier facing Palestine, who aren't able to play home matches, of course, due to the situation there, so the game is being played in Jordan. Korea make the trip on the back of a 3-1 win over Kuwait on Thursday, thanks to goals from Oh Se-hoon, Son Heung-min and Bae Jun-ho. It was Son's 50th goal for Korea in 130 caps. If he scores one more on Tuesday, he'll become Korea's outright second top goal scorer. He'd also set a new personal best for goals in a single year in full internationals with 10. Korea drew 0-0 at home to Palestine in September, so we're looking to pick up a convincing win. On a run of 4 straight wins and unbeaten since the Asian Cup, South Korea sit top of Group B, 5 points clear of both Jordan and Iraq.
Moving on to national team, sticking with national teams, but moving on to baseball. So a shock exit from the Premier 12 tournament.
Yes, I'm afraid so. The match with Australia today, therefore, was essentially a dead rubber. But Korea's exit from the tournament was confirmed on Sunday when Japan beat Cuba 7-6 and Taiwan beat Australia 11-3. This is despite South Korea on Saturday coming back from 6-0 down to beat the Dominican Republic 9-6. Korea won the tournament in 2015 and reached the final in 2019, but according to Yonhap News, depth in starting pitchers was an issue. In the first 4 games, no starting pitcher went more than 4 innings, putting pressure on the relievers. South Korea played on Monday afternoon, beating Australia 5-2.
And lastly, to golf, it looks like Im Jin is in the running for the LPGA Rookie of the Year.
Yes, that's right. She finished second at the LPGA Annika on Sunday in Florida. She hit an 11 under 269 after a final round 2 under 68. It was her best finish in the LPGA. Her previous best was 4th at the JM Eagle LA Championship in April. In terms of Rookie of the Year points, she is now 66 points behind Mao Saigo of Japan, but has the CME Group Tour Championship to come starting this Thursday. A win would earn 150 points, runner-up 80 points. Saigo failed to make the cut in Florida this past weekend, so Im has a genuine chance of winning the award. And in terms of the CME Globe standings, Im moved up 9 places to 22nd and will be one of 11 South Koreans to tee off.
Our sports editor, Paul Neath, many thanks.
Thank you.
With gusts of cold winds across the country, there has been a major drop in temperatures across the country. This morning, Seoul experienced its first below-zero cold of this fall. For tomorrow, readings will stay in single figures even during the daytime, with daily highs only reaching 7 degrees in Seoul. It's easy to catch a cold with a sudden change in temperatures, so please take care. Cold wave warnings were issued this morning in some areas, but have since been removed. Meanwhile, a strong wind warning is in place on the west coast, the coastal areas of Jeollanam province and Jeju Island. Extra precautions are necessary. Tomorrow, Gwangju, Daegu, and Gyeongju will start off at 1 degree, Jeju 9 degrees. Daytime temperatures will get a tad warmer. Gwangju and Gyeongju will move up to 13 degrees, Busan and Jeju 16 degrees. This early winter cold is expected to continue until tomorrow and recover to normal levels of late autumn from the middle of the week. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
And that is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching, and a panel session is coming up.
How to survive in Korea. One room. So, you're surviving in Korea if you've signed a contract for a one room. Obviously, you're a pro. But the real deal begins now. Step 1. Housewarming. No need to buy toilet paper, diffusers or hand soap. You'll get them soon enough as housewarming gifts. And some are bound to pile up. There's nothing better to serve your guests than milpaeyu nabe. If you have Korean friends coming over, don't forget the extra garlic. Step 2. Garbage disposal. With great power comes great responsibility. You've had a good time, so let's get to work. It might be tempting to sweep everything into a trash can, but you have to separate your garbage. Not bothered? Beware that negligence is punished with a fine or public humiliation. Step 3. Drying rack. You're excited to live alone in Korea, but the fate of these items, hanger, storage, or a hanger. Go get fresh coffee outside. Jogging doesn't cost anything, and nothing beats instant rice. But keep one item around so that you don't get too lonely. Step 4. Pros of living alone. No mum. Cons of living alone. No mum. A new towel doesn't magically appear. You have to do the laundry regularly. If anyone gives a towel as a souvenir, take it. Get rid of mold immediately. Don't be lazy with the vacuum cleaner. Housework is an endless affair. Overwhelmed? Give your mum a call and thank her for everything she's done. Did you survive in your one room? Wait, you have an unwanted visitor. Call someone you fancy. Could be the right person for the job.
요즘 한국에선 어떻게 노는지 알려줄까?
한국에선 아이돌이 되어볼 수도 인생 거절을 찾을 수도 있지. 제일 핫한 포토 스팟은 여기. 한국은 분명 너에게 새로운 영감을 줄 거야.
이런 한국, 와보지 않고는 모를걸? 진짜 한국에선 어떻게 먹는지 알려줄까?
K-바비큐? 신김치랑 먹어야지.
치킨? 치맥 페스티벌은 처음이지?
김치? 종류만큼 먹는 법도 가지각색.
김밥? 시장에선, 산에선, 바다에선 이렇게.
국밥?
취향 따라, 입맛 따라. 이런 한국, 와보지 않고는 모를걸?
Hello and welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring today's most pressing global issues into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gyeon. Leaders and representatives from 21 APEC member countries held 2 days of official meetings in Peru. The summit's key outcomes included the reaffirmation of support for multilateral trade systems through the Machu Picchu Declaration and a fresh perspective on the free trade area of the Asia-Pacific agenda in the Ishima Statement. During the summit, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol also held a series of separate summits with world leaders. These include trilateral talks with U.S. President Joe Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, where they focused on the growing threat from North Korea. The three leaders issued a joint statement reaffirming their commitment to the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula under the UN Security Council resolutions. For more on this, we're joined online by Christophe Godin, Professor of Political Science at Kookmin University. Welcome to the program, Professor.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
And also joining us is Hana Kim, Assistant Professor at the Graduate School of International Studies at Seogang University. Thank you for joining us, Professor.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with Professor Kim. The 2024 APEC Summit concluded with a reaffirmation of the vision for shared development based on multilateral trade. So let me ask first, how would you evaluate the outcomes of this summit?
So in terms of engaging in closer cooperation, it seems as though the outcomes of the summit could be viewed to be relatively successful. APEC has long been viewed as a protector of the multilateral trading system since it started in 1989. And this recent summit has actually shown that APEC is still working to sustain this position of promoting free, inclusive, and sustainable trade throughout the Asia-Pacific region. And the leaders of all of the 21 member economies called for enhancing and strengthening free trade and connectivity, and they reaffirmed support for a rules-based multilateral system amid growing concerns over the spread of protectionism that we're seeing worldwide. And this could really be seen through this summit, where APEC leaders held bilateral and trilateral meetings to reaffirm their partnerships and deepen their cooperation. So, for example, South Korea and Peru agreed to deepen their cooperation in mineral trade, investment, and infrastructure, and they signed multiple memorandum of understandings, or MOUs. And this is especially fruitful since South Korea will host APEC next year and has already been planning to focus on creating a stable supply chain with APEC member economies.
Right. What about Professor Godin? How would you assess the overall outcome of APEC this year?
Well, what we've been witnessing, in my opinion, mostly it is a series of attempts, more or less organized attempts, to face the situation created by the election of Donald Trump. Because you know that APEC stands for Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, but economic cooperation here in the mind of the organizers means mostly trade, and more importantly, free trade. Over its 25 years of existence, the APEC has consistently been pushing for lowering tariffs. This resulted in a growing interdependence between all of these economies in the Pacific region. And now what we see is that all of these economies in Asia, in Australia, in Latin America, they depend heavily on US markets. And President Trump, all over his campaign, has been flagging tariffs on imports to America of 10 to 20%, up to 16% for Chinese goods. So now, as growth is slowing down all over the world, even more so in China, what all of these leaders are trying to do is to try to somehow adjust to the situation they've created. For instance, this giant mega port project that China has been announcing in Latin America, this 1.3 billion project that China has been announcing in Peru, is a way first, obviously, to try to replace the US in the role of the economic leader in the region. And at the same time, it is a way to try to boost for this Chinese economy that has been ailing for a couple of years now.
Right. So a lot of events happening at the summit. Now, on the sidelines of the summit, Professor Godang, President Yoon Suk-yeol met with Chinese President Xi Jinping to discuss North Korea's provocations and growing military cooperation with North Korea and Russia. And they urged China to play a constructive role over there. Now, Xi Jinping has also agreed on the necessity for keeping peace on the Korean peninsula. Now, after 2 years of no formal talks between South Korea and China, what is your take on this latest meeting? And do you think there would be a change in China's actions moving forward?
In fact, here, I think we can be quite straightforward, even blunt in a way, because peace for China in the first place means trade. And trade China needs in order to export these commodities that are now not absorbed by domestic consumption in China. You always need to remember that, of course, North Korea can be useful to China because it is China's only main ally in the region. But when it comes to trade, China trades with South Korea up to 30 to 35 times more than with North Korea. So what China needs for now is somehow North Korea to cool down a bit. Because now China's top priority is to boost exports. So this is why China has been taking a somehow friendlier stance with South Korea, but also towards Japan. And when China means that the approach needs to be constructive, constructive to what? Constructive to more trade is what it means, in my opinion, mostly.
Right, so the change in China's actions could come from because South Korea is a bigger trade partner than North Korea is.
Yes.
Right.
You know, when it comes to China, the bottom line is never ideology. It is always money.
Mm-hmm. Then what about Professor Kim? There's been some analysis suggesting a subtle shift in China's stance on the Korean peninsula, like we just touched upon. Now, before they were defending North Korea, but now they're instead emphasizing South Korea's responsibility. What do you think is behind this change in tone?
So it seems as though China's stance on the Korean peninsula has been subtly shifting, as you mentioned. You know, for example, China recently extended a visa-free policy to South Korea, where South Korean passport holders can now visit China without a visa for up to 15 days. But also, and Professor Gordon also touched upon this, Trump's return to the U.S. presidential office is influencing China's stance because Trump is well known for his skepticism regarding the value of the alliance system. It's been widely accepted that Trump will also continue to pursue the so-called American First policy. And as Professor Gordon mentioned, you know, he's also been talking about universal tariffs of 10% to all countries. So there's a high possibility that Trump will renegotiate also the defense burden sharing with South Korea. And this situation provides China with a strategic chance to win over U.S. allies, including South Korea. But at the same time, China's not very happy with the recent rapprochement between North Korea and Russia and their newly signed comprehensive strategic partnership. treaty, which obligates the two countries to assist each other militarily in the event of the war. And along with this, it's said that North Korea has deployed as many as 12,000 troops to help Putin's war effort. So ultimately, all of these elements are making China seek this sort of subtle shift in its position in the Korean peninsula.
Right. These developments could kind of be an opportunity for China's perspective. Now, Xi Jinping placed a strong emphasis on bilateral economic cooperation during his meeting with South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol. And Chinese state-run media highlighted China's role in promoting regional economic cooperation through genuine multilateralism. Professor Godang, could this be a response to the strengthening trilateral cooperation between South Korea, U.S., and Japan?
Oh, yes, certainly, because here I think we need to get back to the point Professor Kim has just made, because here we've got actually two shifting movements taking place at the same time. One is North Korea's shifting to Russia, because for now the priority is geopolitical. It is about asserting the ideological stance. And the other one is China's trying to boost the ailing economy by opening markets all over the region. So when Xi Jinping is calling for what he calls genuine multilateral cooperation, he means that first, he is trying to somehow make up for the losses that are to be generated by the tariffs Trump is to implement, so by exporting more to Asia when China is in no position to keep exporting as much to the US. And second, somehow, he is pushing for some sort of peace offering to Korea and to Japan, which is, in a way, he's somehow offering a sort of trade-off, literally. He says that, well, we will trade more, and as a result, our political differences, somehow we will put them aside. China is trying to turn this crisis that is resulting from the election of President Trump into some sort of opportunity. They're trying to make up the best they can with these situations that they didn't want in the first place.
Right. Just like our Professor Godang mentioned, during the U.S.-China summit, the issue of North Korea's military ties with Russia has been raised, and President Biden called on China to prevent further North Korean troop deployments to Russia, while Xi Jinping reiterated China's stance on protecting its strategic security interests. Now, while the broad framework remains the same, there are still clear differences in details. Professor Kim, how do you interpret this divergence?
Yeah, so the United States has been asking China to exert its influence over North Korea to essentially keep it in check. And this is because 90% of North Korea's foreign trade relies on China, which gives China significant leverage over Pyongyang. But China maintains that North Korea's military support to Russia is a bilateral matter between those two countries and unrelated to China. So for China, however, persuading North Korea is challenging, and applying pressure can also risk pushing North Korea closer to Russia. So they're playing this game, between the three countries where potential pushes could lead one country to move closer to another country. And so there's the possibility that North Korea might respond with even more provocative actions. And so from China's perspective, maintaining stability on the Korean Peninsula takes precedence over the war between Russia and Ukraine, which is more geographically farther away. But that being said, President Xi Jinping this time has made a slightly stronger than usual statement by emphasizing that China will not tolerate threats to its security or core interests when talking about the Korean Peninsula. So this message, while it was directed at the United States, it can also be interpreted as a signal to North Korea, since historically, North Korea has often timed its provocations to coincide with transitions in U.S. administrations. So this nuance can't be overlooked.
Right, so it's also a message, it's a bilateral, two-way message to North Korea and also the U.S. Now, there's also the issue of Taiwan. Both President Biden and President Xi Jinping reiterated their respective positions, but it appears they were unable to find common ground. Professor Godang, what could this mean for the future of U.S.-China relations moving forward?
Well, I'm afraid that anything that President Biden has said is unfortunately to be overlooked because he won't be in office in a couple of months. And it's always difficult to tell what is happening in the mind of Donald Trump. But one of the few things we know for sure is that Donald Trump is an isolationist. What matters to him is America, and the rest of the world, he considers it to be some sort of liability. So Taiwan is not as central in his foreign policy as it used to be for his predecessors. So now, at the same time, I think that to understand what is happening in China, we need to focus on China as well, because China, so just like America, cares relatively little for what is happening in the rest of the world. But the catch is that from the Chinese point of view, Taiwan is a part of China. So China is, right now, in my opinion, China cares much more about taking Taiwan back than the US under Trump's presidency, at least under the Trump administration, than America cares to protect Taiwan. So the election of Trump combined with the Chinese Communist parties being tempted to use Taiwan as a sort of scapegoat in order to make up for their failures, economically speaking. What is happening now is that the Chinese economy is slowing down. So the Chinese Communist Party is trying to make up with some inflammatory nationalistic rhetoric, which includes eventually, obviously, getting Taiwan back into the motherland. And at the same time, as far as we can tell, it is very unlikely that a Trump administration is to take a very strong stance in order to defend Taiwan. So as far as we can tell, and here I'm being as cautious as I can, all of this is probably bad news for Taiwan and the Taiwanese people.
Right, so we'll have to keep watch on how things develop at that front. Now, after a month following their October meeting, President Yoon Suk-yeol and Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba met again, emphasizing closer cooperation due to the shifting international situation, especially the North Korea-Russian military ties. They also discussed continuing the so-called shuttle diplomacy. Professor Kim, how would you evaluate the latest summit?
It seems as though South Korea and Japan relations have improved quite a bit recently. As you mentioned, President Yoon and Prime Minister Ishiba held their second in-person bilateral meeting to strengthen Korea-Japan relations during the APEC summit, and both have expressed strong concerns over the North Korean-Russia military ties. So because of this, they agreed to elevate bilateral relations between the two countries, since close coordination and cooperation is important to counter security challenges. And this is because the deepening security cooperation between North Korea and Russia poses serious concerns not only for South Korea, but also for Japan, which has its own territorial disputes with Russia. So in this context, reaffirming close diplomatic coordination between South Korea and Japan is of great importance. And shuttle diplomacy between South Korea and Japan was initially reinstated during the tenure of former Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. And after Kishida stepped down, the Ishida cabinet was inaugurated, and Ishida has been expected to follow Kishida's foreign policy line, but last month, electoral defeat of the ruling party has sparked discussions of Ishiba's early resignation. So naturally, questions are arising about the continuation of shuttle diplomacy. But amidst this type of uncertainty with Japanese diplomacy, still the reaffirmation of shuttle diplomacy between South Korea and Japan holds significant meaning. it shows that the commitment of both nations are trying to maintain amicable relations. And in this way, restoring relations has been one of President Yoon's significant diplomatic achievements, and it's been an important step for both countries to collaborate more closely together.
Right, and that's some good news to hear. Now, at the Trilateral Summit between South Korea, U.S. and Japan, a joint statement condemning the illegal North Korea-Russian military cooperation has been issued, and a new Trilateral Cooperation Office was established. What do you see the significance in this, Professor Kim?
Yeah, so President Yoon, President Biden, and Prime Minister Shiba met for about 40 minutes to reaffirm their trilateral security partnership, with the three countries strongly condemning North Korea's deployment of troops to Russia and its involvement in the conflict, and making a joint statement regarding this. So, as you mentioned, they agreed to establish a trilateral secretariat to ensure a cooperative framework to further align objectives and actions. And through this, they decided to rotate their leadership every 2 years, with South Korea, the United States, and Japan taking turns. And they've been hoping to establish this soon. But this trilateral summit and the discussions that took place will most likely be the last with President Biden, since he's going to be stepping down as president. Their first meeting between the three countries was in August 2023, the historic Camp David summit. And since then, the three countries have been continuing to show ongoing progress. But as we've kind of been alluding to throughout this entire time, the return of Trump is going to change a lot of things regarding foreign policy. President-elect Donald Trump champions the American first foreign policy, and he may be unlikely to maintain this new trilateral secretariat for coordinating and implementing their shared commitments. And previously, Trump has boasted about his friendship with Kim Jong-un, and they've met in a series of summits. But Kim Jong-un's attitude may have changed this time around, even though Trump's back, because of the strengthening relationship between Russia and North Korea. Kim Jong-un's attitude may have changed. North Korea may be more emboldened and possibly more dangerous. And even recently, North Korea has been critical of U.S. support of Ukraine and has called for limitless expansion of their military nuclear program to counter U.S.-led threats after South Korea, the U.S., and Japan met. So despite Trump's win, Kim Jong-un, who's now backed by Russia, may be less likely to be open to the kind of diplomacy that we saw during Trump's first term. So a lot of this is ultimately going to depend on whether Trump continues on with the trilateral summit. But President Yoon has expressed hope that the trilateral framework will continue to receive support from U.S. and the next president.
Right, so we'll have to see how things flow under the second-term presidency of Donald Trump. Thank you so much for your insights tonight, Professor Kim and Professor Godang. We'll have to wrap up our discussion here. Thank you so much for your expertise. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again for joining us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.
요즘 한국에선 어떻게 노는지 알려줄까?
한국에선 아이돌이 되어볼 수도 인생 번호를 찾을 수도 있지. 제일 핫한 포토 스팟은 여기. 한국은 분명 너에게 새로운 영감을 줄 거야.